Good evening, everyone, and midnight, morning, whatever time it is for some. Welcome back to another wonderful tasting with the Virtual Tasting Society. I am Vadim Perlovsky, and today we're excited to have, I think I'm not out of place to say, the crown jewel of the Impex portfolio, the brand that Sam has really grown, and I mean, it's well represented behind him. We are excited to finally taste Kilchoman. So thank you so much for being here. Representing Kilchoman for us is Emma McHarrie. All right?
Yes, correct.
Awesome. Okay. And she's zooming in, as usual, from Scotland. Thank you very much for joining us in the middle of the night on your time. We're very excited to have you, excited to learn about the brand and taste some amazing expressions that Sam and I have worked out. We have 6 expressions in front of us. If you know what order you want us to take, oh no, we know the orders. Sam told us already the order. The order that it was posted in the event is the order we're going to go in, so that should be nice and easy. Sam is on top of it as always. But that said, thank you so much for being here. We're super happy to have you. We are excited to learn about the brand. I am embarrassed to say this is one brand I don't know much about, so I'm very excited to learn and taste and fall in love with it as many have before me. So Emma, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Yeah, well, kind of just the same. Thank you everyone so much for being here. Very happy to be hosting this for you all and introducing some of you maybe to Kilchoman that have never had it before. Kind of history wise, like just to give you like an overall view of the distillery in general. Kilchoman is a relatively new distillery. It was established in 2005 by a man called Anthony Wells. He runs the distillery with his wife, Kathy, and their 3 sons, Peter, George, and James. Peter, George, and James like really run the sales and marketing team, so they work with me, trying to sell Kilchoman as far around the world as possible. And I've done that for a very long time, really since the start of export. And then Anthony and Kathy are based on Islay. They work at the distillery every single day. Anthony is the managing director and master distiller, and then Kathy just kind of does all the little like kind of extra jobs here and there. I would say, to be fair, Anthony does like to say he kind of runs the distillery, but I think we all know it's definitely Kathy that does that. Anthony's kind of goal, the whole reason that the distillery exists in the first place, is because he wanted to create whiskey where doing every bit of the process was done on one site, from barley to bottle. So that meant growing all of our own barley, malting it ourselves, distilling it ourselves, maturing it ourselves, and bottling it ourselves, all on the one place. Obviously, at the time in 2005, if you kind of think about a little bit of like the history of Scotch whisky, if you know much about that, it wasn't really the time to be opening a brand new distillery and doing all of that ourselves. At the time, a lot of distilleries were shutting or had been shut and were being reopened by these massive companies. So on Islay specifically, like I mean, I don't really remember it as much. I was a small child and didn't care much about whiskey, but speaking to like my parents, my grandparents, that kind of thing, they remember it very well. All the distilleries kind of shutting, then reopening. These big companies came in, bought them, and cut out all these smaller bits of their process. So got rid of the malt floors, and got rid of the warehouses, got rid of the bottlings. Nothing was really done on Islay, and that took away, well, a lot of that will work for one, but a lot of like the kind of Islay brand of things, like the actual Islay brand as a whole, I felt was so significant. And that was because obviously a lot of it was done here, on top of just the flavour profile of everything. And obviously that having been lost, Anthony really wanted to revive it. So that's what we do. We grow as much of our barley as possible on a farm that basically surrounds the distillery. So in 2005, Anthony didn't buy a distillery, he didn't buy buildings, he didn't buy land. He basically approached a farmer on Islay and asked him if he could rent some of the abandoned farm buildings, and asked if he would grow barley for us. And that's what happened. We started things up. really small scale production. Never thought we would get much bigger than what we initially began with. It had a capacity at that point to maybe do about 300,000 litres of spirit, but we didn't hit capacity until a good kind of 7, 8 years into the process. And now we have a capacity to do 600,000 litres from the expansion that we've done at the distillery. We've built some more buildings, we've moved things around just to make things a bit easier to work in. So 600,000 litres now. Obviously, that is still tiny. You kind of know anything about scale of distilleries and things, that's a drop in the ocean compared to what some other distilleries can do. On Islay, the biggest distillery is Kilchoman. Kilchoman distillery makes 6.5 million litres of spirit compared to our little 600,000. It does seem pretty mad, but you can go further afield, distilleries in the mainland, and it's millions more than that. So doing it the way that we do it was always about like the way in which it was done, the ethos, the philosophy, rather than just big quantities. And it was also about quality of spirit, because we knew we were going to be releasing young whiskies, but we absolutely didn't want to release bad whiskey. But there was this big stigma, and I think to an extent there still is, that in the industry or as whiskey drinkers, people want age, people want old whiskies, and we knew that we weren't going to be able to provide that. And if we were, it wasn't going to be for a very long time, but we couldn't just sit and have nothing. So through the ways that we make the spirit specifically, so things like the fermentation, our style of distillation, so like the size and shape of the stills, and that's really allowed us to make like light, sweet, floral spirit, but it's still got depth, it's still got character, quality casks, like good quality wood, and then it can make really nice whiskies that don't need to have like a big number, as in a big age on them to taste good. Overall, flavour wise, I would say it is like it's balanced. It's a very balanced whiskey. It obviously is an Islay whiskey. Like, don't be fooled that it's not going to be peaty. It definitely is. But I don't think it's as heavy or as oily or as iodine or like that medicinal taste that you get from a lot of Islay whiskies. I think that's what Kilchoman doesn't really have. It's got the peat, it's got the smoke, but it doesn't have the heaviness. It doesn't have that kind of slap you in the face peaty flavour that a lot of Islay whiskies do, which not necessarily is a bad thing, but it just wasn't something that we wanted because it exists in the industry. It's been done by distilleries and it's been done incredibly well. So there's no point in kind of us copying that. I don't think we would have been half as successful, not even in terms of how we were doing things, but how the whiskey tasted, if we were just copying something that was already available on the island. That would have been very boring for us and very boring for everyone else drinking it. So, do you have any questions kind of about the history of the distillery, how we started, how difficult that was, sort of thing, just before we talk about the whiskies individually?
We want to know about all that stuff.
No, everyone happy?
What was the original plan? I mean, the 600,000 liters is very, like you said, it's very small. So
Yeah,
was that a growth projection, or is that you guys originally started with that?
I don't think that was the original plan. I think, well, what Anthony always kind of talks about is the fact that he never really knew what was going to happen, because like even Anthony couldn't have predicted the spike that the whiskey industry's had in the last couple of years. I don't think anyone could have really predicted that. I think a lot of it to do with Kilchoman was, yes, a good like plan for what we were going to do, and Anthony really stuck to his guns on, this is how I want to make it, and I feel like people will just support that, and people absolutely did. But I think another part of it that we definitely have to like take into consideration was the fact that it was just the way the whiskey industry went, as in there was a massive growth in the industry in general, and that massively helped us because there was room in the market for us to succeed. Whereas the whiskey industry 10, 15 years prior to us opening, everyone was kind of just doing the same thing. There was a couple of like independent bottling companies maybe making the more experimental stuff or doing stuff that would have been considered, I don't know, weirder. But then all the other distilleries making it wise were all just kind of sticking to the same model. And then the variations and flavours came from, well, regions, I guess, if it was peated, if it was unpeated, age of casks, and that was really it. So there wasn't room in the industry for people to do different things. So that's why Kilchoman was successful, was because we've done something different, but also just because the industry kind of grew that way. Um, Anthony always says that he keeps making like these 5-year plans and has expectations, and he just kind of throws them out the window because every time he thinks something's going to happen or he's going to reach a milestone, he kind of just beats that, which is a very good problem to have, but still an issue in terms of the fact that whiskey is obviously a waiting game. So we're constantly kind of, what we're doing now, that 600,000 litres isn't for now, it isn't for tomorrow, it isn't for a year's time, it's for 5, 10, maybe even 15 years down the road. So that makes it quite difficult for us as a brand, because it's hard to track these trends if you're quite a new distillery, because you just can't track it as well as, or know as well as how things are going to work. So we never expected this. We never expected to be at 600,000 litres. We never expected to have the growth that we did, even in the first 5 years, 10 years. When we got to 2015, that's when we started expanding the distillery. And we were at capacity at that point. Like, we were crying out for more ability to make more spirit or have extra warehousing, but we couldn't because we didn't own the farm. And then in 2015, the separate family that were running the farm, like well before we came, decided they wanted to move off Isla, so they put it up for sale. And at that point, it was kind of like our saving moment, because we absolutely needed more space, more capacity, more warehousing, more ability to produce spirit. And we started saving up a bit of money obviously after that point, and we expanded the still house in 2019. That obviously only happened, well, 4 years ago. So you think 4 years ago, whiskey's got to be 3 years to be called whiskey. Like, we've not really caught up with ourselves at all. So yes, 600,000 litres, but that's not really what we're bottling, if that makes sense. So yes, it was never really in the plan, but I wouldn't really say we're even at it yet anyway. Yeah, I just seen that comment, and the boys did try to burn the place down. We've went through multiple issues with um issues in production, I guess you could say. I don't really know what to call that. Uh, they basically they accidentally set fire to the kiln. So definitely a mistake, and one that I think anyone else would have lost their job for. But that's what you get, things you get away with when your dad owns the distillery. They were trying to watch a rugby game, long story short, and accidentally, well, I say accidentally, they definitely had a plan. They put more peat on the kiln than what they were meant to, so they didn't have to come back and check it. Because if they had to come back and check it, they would have missed the rugby. Obviously, even more importantly, the rugby game was Scotland v England. And if anyone knows anything about the UK, the rivalry with Scotland and England is quite strong, especially when it comes to something like rugby, because it's something that we're actually good at. So we get very invested when things like this happen. And they were watching the game and basically didn't go and check the kiln, and came back an hour later to a roof that had caved in and a burning building, and a fire brigade, the local Isla Fire Brigade there. I'm sure they were very pleased because they don't really get out much, as you can imagine, not very many fires on Isla, but I don't think Anthony was best impressed. So, whiskies. Um, Starting with something, the first one that you've got is McHarrie. So McHarrie is like our flagship whiskey, almost our standard whiskey. So the thing that you're going to find most commonly available around the world, if you see somewhere that sells Kilchoman. So this is the one that's our biggest export, our biggest release. It's named after a beach on Isla. The beach itself is about 2 minutes from the distillery. If none of you are lucky enough to have visited Isla, I suggest you just Google this beach to find out why you would name a whiskey after it. It's absolutely beautiful. It's my favourite place on Isla. And that's, I'm not just saying that because the whiskey's named after it. It's made predominantly with bourbon barrels, ex-American oak bourbon barrels. And then it does have some also sherry casks in the vatting that we use to make it as well. Most of Kilchoman's whiskies are either full maturations in casks, so in one kind of cask, or vattings slash marriages, kind of interchangeable words, um, off casks. So we don't do really finishes as often. We might do them here and there for kind of single cask releases, that kind of thing. But more so what we do is a marriage of casks. So when I'm saying bourbon and sherry, it's fully mature bourbon barrels, it's fully mature sherry casks, and then we're marrying them together. For this one, it is still predominantly bourbon. 90% of the vatting was bourbon barrels, and then the other 10% is sherry casks. And we do that every single time we're making it. So the recipe never changes. It's a consistently available whiskey. It's unlimited. So you could buy the same bottle today in a store that's local to you that stocks Kilchoman, and then you could buy the same version in 5 years' time. Or that's kind of the idea behind it. It's always kind of going to be the same. Obviously, whiskies do kind of evolve and change as the distillery grows and changes. And that's obviously down to the fact as well that our whiskey's made so like traditionally you will get more tweaks in the process because it's all done by hand, but overall we are aiming for the same flavor. It's 46% alcohol, so I know some people were talking about the cask strength version. No, this is not the cask strength version. People absolutely love that whiskey though, and they love cask strength McHarrie. It was like a one-off release. We done it once or twice, and we've not really done it since. It's hard to do cask strength whiskies for us, especially in that kind of big, vast amount, because again, not very much stock. But yes, everyone did really enjoy cask strength. But no, this is the normal version, 46%, and it's 50 ppm. So that's on paper quite a high peating level. People are always like, oh, that sounds like it's going to be quite strong, quite smoky. Like if you were to compare it to other Islay distilleries, that's higher than Lafroig. That's the same peating level as Ardbeg. So these are obviously distilleries that are making very peated whiskies, very smoky whiskies. Whereas Kilchoman, like I said, it's more balanced, it's softer, it's rounder, it's maybe a bit more approachable. The peaty flavours a lot more in the finish, I find, in a lot of our whiskies than necessarily the overall like flavour that you're getting. And again, a lot of that's just down to how we're putting the spirit as and how we're producing our spirit. So after we've malted that barley, for this one here, unfortunately, it isn't made with our own barley that we've grown on the farm or malted ourselves. And that's just down to the fact that our farm is only a certain size. We're limited with how much barley we can grow. We would love to grow everything for all of our whiskies, but we just don't have the space. So about 40% of our annual production is whiskey that's made entirely A to Z on the farm, barley to bottle. They're the whiskies that are obviously very unique to us, very unique to the whiskey industry in general. And then the other 60% is made how majority of other distilleries are doing it, which is buying barley in that is already malted. And that is how we make more of the bigger releases. So things like McHarrie being unlimited, we just wouldn't be able to supply the barley ourselves that would be needed to make this whiskey. Even, as I say, on the small scale that we do things, we just do not have the room. There is not the space. On Islay, to be honest, most of Islay's ground is very peated, so you just can't grow barley in ground that's like that. 50 ppm pre-distillation, isn't it? The distillation process makes this different. Yeah. So through our stills, we have loads of copper contact. Our stills are really small. Our biggest still that we have is the wash still, and it's 3,000 litres. And then the spirit still is just over 2,000 litres. They've also got really tall and skinny necks on them. So that allows us to remove like heavier, oilier, iodine flavors or heavy alcohol, to be quite honest. And that heavy alcohol tends to contain the flavors that make the whiskey in general, if it is peated, that's what will carry the peated flavors through. So like stills themselves don't like peat. Stills in casks as well don't like peat. They try and remove it the whole time. A still would look at these heavier, oilier like components or compounds in the spirit and think it's bad. It's trying to remove it because the whole point of distillation is separating light from heavy, and peat is a heavy flavour that will be created through the process. So by having our stills really tall, really thin, we have quite high cut points as well. So that ensures that when the temperature gets a bit lower in the still, we're still not distilling heavier flavors. We also have reflux balls in our spirit stills. Those reflux balls allow for lots of, well, literally says it in the name, a lot of reflux. So when the spirit goes up the neck, it falls back down, it's caught in these kind of bulbs that are in the middle of the still, and it like spins it round. So it's just constantly distilling it. So that again is constantly touching the copper as it goes round and round and round, and it's breaking down these heavy flavors, it's creating lighter flavors. Our stills just work just brilliantly, just effortlessly, because they not only remove the heaviness, but it's basically like there's no waste because it's breaking it down. It's not just pulling it into the copper or sinking it down to the bottom, it breaks it down, it redistills it so it can travel through. So we're getting as much as possible without getting any flavour that we don't want. So yeah, so 50 ppm, and when any or majority of distilleries talk about peating level, I think the important thing to remember is the fact that this is all during malting essentially. It's when you smoke that barley that is then used to make that whiskey. So when I'm telling you it's 50 ppm in comparison to drinking, I don't know, an Ardbeg that sits at 50 ppm, don't expect the same flavour, because yes, that number defines a peating level, but it's the peating level of the barley. How we then use that barley afterwards in comparison to how Ardbeg might use theirs, obviously just using them as an example, because same peating level, is two entirely different versions of making whiskey. Also the casks, we get very, very active casks because we source them directly from wherever they were made. So we don't go through cooperages for our casks, or have them broken down and put back together. We will source the casks from wherever they were made. Up until releases to this point, we used to get all of our bourbon barrels from Buffalo Trace Distillery, which is in Kentucky, in America, up until last summer, when they basically wouldn't supply us bourbon barrels anymore because it was basically too much of a hassle for them giving to like third parties like Kilchoman. They could supply enough within their own kind of brand and company that they didn't need to ship them to us separately, which was what they were doing. And yes, they were shipping them to us cold, so they were not broken down, they'd never been touched, and that meant when they reached the distillery, the wood was still soaked in that flavour for, well, for example, this one, bourbon. And that meant that our casks had so much, they were just so active, they had so much flavour to them that when we were maturing them, again, helping the whiskey to taste young in a shorter period of time, but also the pores in the cask were a lot more active. The activity within them, as in the expansion and contraction of the wood, meant that again a lot more of those heavier oils were removed, so it took out the peaty flavour a bit more than maybe what you would typically expect to happen in a short space of time for maturation. Because generally what you'll hear in the industry is people saying that shorter maturations for peated whiskey will give you more peaty flavour. That generally is the case because it's not had the time to do that or to remove that as much. But for us, because the casks are so active, we generally haven't found that to be a problem. Obviously, this was up until last year when we obviously were thrown into a bit of a disaster when we couldn't get Buffalo Trace bourbon barrels anymore. We kind of searched the whole of Kentucky looking for someone else, but no one was really giving them to us for the same reasons. For them, it just was too much of a hassle to try and ship to third parties. We actually went outside of Kentucky for a while and we got our bourbon barrels from Breckenridge, which is like a small independent bourbon distillery in Colorado. We were using them for a while and we were quite happy with them, so far anyway, but they obviously, them being quite small, they can't really send us that much or that frequently. And also they're top fill casks. So all of our casks are stored on their side. So they're not palletized, which means that they're, when if you have the bung, as in like the opening of the cask on a top fill barrel, that bung, that opening of the barrel is going to be on the cask, what we would call the cask end, as in where we write kind of the number and the distillery name or the branding or whatever. Whereas we store our cask on the side, we can need the bung to be on the side of the barrel or the cask. So that was causing us some problems. So we actually now do source some casks from a cooperage in Speyside. which is obviously where the majority of distilleries will get their cask from. There's nothing particularly wrong with coopered casks. Like 90% or 99% of whiskey that's made in Scotland is probably made with coopered casks. And obviously no one bats an eye, no one thinks anything of it. But it's just because when we first started back in the earlier days, the age was going to be so much more of a problem because we were going to be releasing much younger whiskies. We knew we kind of didn't want to get coopered casks. We didn't want to ruin this beautiful new make spirit that we made and then buy wood that was going to be slightly cheaper, a bit more easy to source, but we felt like it was riskier for us in the long run because we could then mature that for 5 years and go, oh, that wasn't really as good as what we wanted in comparison to using fresh casks bought straight from source, that we knew were guaranteed to give us a more richer flavour, I would say. So now that we are that wee bit older, and we are making whiskies that are slightly older, we can get casks from cooperages, which obviously makes it a bit more easier, less of a wait to having to get them shipped the whole way from America. And we're also getting some casks from Jim Beam as well. They ship casks to Islay, obviously with owning Islay distilleries. So they own Lefroy, they own Bowmore, so they send casks to Islay already. So we're getting some Jim Beam casks as well. And we'll see how much of an effect this has. Obviously, we've now got kind of the options. We've got the fresh casks from someone who isn't Buffalo Trace. So the Breckenridge casks, we've got the Coopered casks, and then we've got the Jim Beam casks as well. So in the next few years, I think it'll be quite kind of interesting to see how much, if at all, that has a difference on our whiskies. Other places we get casks from, so obviously the little bit of sherry that's in the McHarrie Bay. All these casks come from Jose Miguel Martin, which is in Jerez in Spain. They are like fresh, they come straight from Jose Miguel in Jerez, and they're not touched. We've not had any problems. We have not had to change supplier for them. We've never sourced sherry casks from anyone else. The first time we filled a sherry cask in 2006, we got it from this company, and we've filled every single sherry cask from this company. We're very happy with how they work. They make us excellent quality sherry matured whiskies, which are very hard to produce in the industry, I think. Most distilleries don't use sherry casks frequently, or if they do, they ensure that they have a really, really good supplier for them. And that's because sherry is temperamental to work with. It's less consistent. It's harder to get kind of a good, consistent made whiskey with it in comparison to bourbon barrels, which are pretty similar across the board. McHarrie Bay flavour wise, overall, I would say it's light, it's fresh, it's a good introduction to Kilchoman. It gives you kind of everything that we aim to produce, I would say, like as in flavour wise, we wanted light, we wanted fresh, but we also wanted depth, we wanted layers, we wanted character, and I think this definitely does that. Anthony always said that bourbon was his preference with things to mature Kilchoman in, because in bourbon there's kind of nowhere to hide. It just kind of displays everything you've done just there, it holds it on a pedestal, and having our standard whiskey matured in bourbon was something that we wanted to do from the very beginning. We came up with this recipe to make McHarrie Bay using kind of the very early releases of the distillery. So when we first started releasing whiskey from Kilchoman, we done these like, it was like a 2009 autumn release, a 2009 winter, and then it was like 2010 spring, summer, autumn, winter, and we kind of done that through the years until we released McHarrie Bay in 2012, and that was based upon basically these trials of how we felt our whiskey tasted the nicest in, and this was the version that we felt was the best, and this is literally what we've stuck with ever since. It's changed slightly, but very little. Kind of it's changed really in age, I would say, is the biggest thing that's changed about it. Obviously, when we started making it, it was a lot more kind of 3-4-year-old casks that we were putting into it. Now McHarrie Bay sits about 5-6 years old. Occasionally there's some 7-year-old casks in there. Occasionally there is still some 4-3-year-old casks in there, just to kind of create the balance. But other than that, it has been the exact same thing ever since we first done it, over 10 years ago.
So I mean, I think Kilchoman has kind of built a legacy of releasing younger whiskeys, right? You've taken a
Hmm.
stance to not put an age, a number on any of your releases, or at least the ones that are
Hmm.
commercial released. Um, and you were worried about wood quality to age younger spirit. Was there any consideration at the beginning to source smaller barrels? Like that's what a lot of places in America do. And they'll
Yeah.
3 gallons so that it ages faster and have like that rapid aging. If that
Hmm.
was initially the concern and the thinking, was that something you tried? Or because I mean there's another distillery in Ireland that does quarter casks, right? So like
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
doable. So was that something that was considered? And if yes, why wasn't it done, or was it done? Or
We did buy some. We definitely did buy some, as in we have done not massive releases, but we have bought some quarter casks. Um, I just feel like we just didn't. Anthony was one thing that you kind of wanted to keep it a bit more. I wouldn't want to say traditional because it definitely traditional wasn't really what we were doing in terms of flavor, but um, keeping things maybe a bit more familiar or a bit close to home. I don't think we necessarily want to release our first whiskey and just kind of really confuse people, as in with what we were doing. I think bourbon and sherry as well are things that are very understandable in the industry. People kind of know them, are familiar with them, and recognize them. So they know what to expect. I think it was going to be difficult enough to get people to try a new distillery's whiskey. Maybe not so much nowadays. I think you also have to like. I think the key thing with Kilchoman is you've got to really think about kind of the time of the industry back when we were doing this. Um, we were releasing our first whiskey in 2009, and it was at a time where all these other distilleries were releasing all the whiskey that they had sitting in casks in warehouses for the whole time these distilleries had been shut. So there was distilleries on Islay and in Scotland releasing whiskies that were 30, 40 years old. And then we were there like, this is our 3 year old, and like trying to convince people that that was still a really nice whiskey. So I think it was just a bit more, it was maybe a bit easier to translate and like explain to people if it was maybe something a bit more familiar. Since then, we have bought hundreds of different experimental types of casks. Like we weren't reluctant to try it, but for the first initial releases, I think we wanted something that was a bit more understanding maybe to people. I think the fact that we were already doing non-age statements, we weren't going to put that in the front of it, the fact that it was a new Islay distillery, something people hadn't heard of, I think we're already enough kind of hurdles to jump. Not that necessarily I don't think quarter casts are the weirdest thing that you can do in the industry. They are maybe a bit more familiar, but we wanted to see as well how Kilchoman would perform in more standard style of casks, and also creating a like relationship with suppliers from day one, as in building trust and having that, because yes, we don't use Buffalo Trace casks anymore, but we used them almost since day one. And we used them for a very long time, and that was because I think we found them kind of at the start. We were like, we want to use your casks, and we form that good relationship with them. And the same with the sherry supply, we've used them literally since day one, and I think that's the reason why we still use them now, is because they support, like you support them, they'll support you, sort of thing. Quarter casts are also a bit harder to source, so they wouldn't have been the easiest for us to get our hands on in comparison to just standard bourbon barrels. So probably a few different reasons, really. Um, I also seen someone was asking about the Portela maltings, the peat, or not the peat, the malted barley. Yeah, we don't get it from them anymore. Not through any real decision of our own. To be honest, they no longer supply distilleries that are not Diageo. So because it's a Diageo owned maltings, unless you are a Diageo distillery nowadays, they will not give you barley. It probably sounds a lot worse than what it is. Everyone's like, "Oh my god, like Diageo, like can't believe they've done that," sort of thing. And like I get it. To be honest, I think the only thing we would have appreciated was maybe a bit more notice. They basically turned it around and said to us after we received like a lorry load of malted barley, they were like, "Yeah, that's the last one. We're not giving you any more." So I think we maybe would have appreciated a bit, yeah, more notice. But like the barley was never from Islay in the first place. People were always like, "Oh, but it's not from Islay anymore." Like the barley was never from Islay for the maltings in Portela, and it was actually English barley, so it wasn't even Scottish barley. Um, they then brought it over to Islay, malted it here. They did use Islay peat, which obviously very important, and then they distributed it to all the distilleries that needed it. Now we're using a company on the mainland, so elsewhere in Scotland is a company called Crisp, and they do use Scottish barley. So that's quite nice because it actually is, even though it sounds like it's happening further away, it actually is closer to home than maybe what we were using before. We are sending them our peat. So when we first started using them, obviously we were really kind of worried about the fact that it would really change the flavour because it wouldn't be peat from Islay. So we were getting unpeated barley from them for the first few months. This was last year, so the kind of middle of end of last summer. And from then until about Christmas time, we were getting unpeated barley from them. The start of this year, we have started sending them our peat, so it will still have that like distinctive Islay flavour. The kind of the reason, so main reason to build your own new bigger malting floor. We have actually spoken about building our own like maltings, but it wouldn't be another traditional maltings. What we spoke about doing was actually building like a commercial, well, I wouldn't call it a commercial maltings, but essentially that's what it is, a machine operated maltings. So we were going to put in like a big, it's called a Saladin box. And what that essentially is a big kind of a big malting floor, like similar to the one that we do have at the distillery. It's a closest thing to a traditional floor that you can have using modern methods. So it's a big room that the barley lies on, and there's these big like kind of levers that spin the barley round, and it's climate controlled. So it basically just means that you don't have to go in there and kind of check it, turn it, look after it the way that we do with our traditional floor. And we would buy barley in, like plain barley, unmalted barley. We would buy that in and then malt it there and then distribute it to the other Islay distilleries, because obviously it would be a bit nicer to have it done here. Like, yes, I'm saying there's pros to kind of doing it with the ones in the mainland with the fact that it is now Scottish barley, but there is also something quite nice about the fact that it was just done on the island. Even if it is commercial, and that kind of has no impact on the flavour at all. But there was something quite nice about it having been done here. But I think the other nice thing about using the maltings in the mainland at the moment is the fact that they can let us kind of experiment a bit more with peating levels. But our own maltings is a big if but maybe. It's sort of like we'll see. It's a massive cost for us to put that in, and it's something that at the moment would be nice to do, but I don't think it's in the near future plans for the distillery. We're quite happy with what the situation has played out like at the moment, and getting barley from away or using our own stuff that's done entirely ourselves. We're okay with that. So the next whiskey that you have, I believe, is Batch Strength. Batch Strength is a new release, something that we have spoken about for a while at the distillery, but something that we knew we kind of weren't able to do, and it is essentially a cask strength Kilchoman, a cask strength core range Kilchoman. People love cask strength Kilchoman. I mean, I literally spoke about one whiskey for 2 seconds on this, and someone already mentioned McHarrie cask strength. Like, it's one of the things that people just absolutely love about this, the style of whiskey we produce. I think it's because of multiple different reasons, to be honest. I don't think you can pinpoint it to necessarily one thing. A lot of it's to do with our quality of our spirit, because there's so much flavour there. And then maturing it in the cask, you don't necessarily need to add in the water. I think the only reason we do dilute a lot of our whiskies is because of like volume, to try and make a bit more. So most of our whiskies are either 46% or 50. But Anthony's always said that when he's trying them, you get it's just Kilchoman times 10. It's just an elevation of the flavour. When he tries even McHarrie in comparison to McHarrie cask strength, we love McHarrie, Anthony loves McHarrie, but just McHarrie cask strength just has everything that you want in McHarrie, and then just elevated. It just lifts it up. It just brings it out of its shell. we would have continued doing McHarrie cast strength, but we didn't necessarily want to have kind of both. We didn't want McHarrie and then also McHarrie cast strength. We kind of wanted McHarrie just to be McHarrie. So what we've kind of done instead is a whiskey that's obviously called Back Strength. It is similar to McHarrie in the sense of that it's made with bourbon and sherry casks, but it also does have some red wine casks in it as well. Predominantly bourbon. About 70% of the vatting for this one is still those bourbon barrels. I think the bourbon barrels kind of tie everything together. They're the glue. So they they tie everything together, and they, like I said earlier on, they display Kilchoman, I think, in the best sort of light. And then 20% of the vatting is these ex-red wine casks. It's Portuguese red wine as well, not port, but Portuguese red wine. And then the other 10% is sherry. It sounds like quite a weird marriage, like it's quite a weird like creation of casks, but I think it works. I think it works really well. I don't think you can necessarily taste the red wine to the point of like going, that's a red wine matured whiskey. I think the red wine is just there to give it an extra layer of flavour, give it something different about it. So it does have that different note. I think you get like I really get it on the nose. Like when I smell the whiskey, I really get like a summer fruit or red berry like nose to it, which obviously comes from the red wine. And then to taste, it gives it like a lovely like creaminess. It gives it like a really nice texture, which definitely comes from those red wine casks, because we get that in these kind of these wine casks quite a lot. And then the sherry, again, it's there to necessarily, it gives it depth, it gives it a thicker, more oily mouthfeel or aftertaste. It really helps to bring out the peat. The sherry casks always do, but I don't think it's necessarily there to go, that's a sherry matured whiskey. Like I don't think if I told you it's got sherry casks in it that you would necessarily pick up on them. It's quite a subtle flavour, but it's definitely there. Without it, we notice the difference. It's 50 ppm once again, and it is 57%. So the reason it's not called cask strength is because technically that would be a lie. We could call it cask strength. I mean, plenty of distilleries do it and just kind of, they might add in the tiny bit of water and just say, yep, cask strength, and release it, and that's fine. And we could have definitely have done that, but we felt like batch strength was a more accurate representation of what it actually is, because we do add in a little bit of water to this whiskey, and that's for consistency. If we try to do a core range whiskey and have it cask strength, making it, because the change in the alcohol every single time you would go to vat the whiskey, as in marry together all the casks, the variation in the alcohol percent does change the flavour. Like the alcohol percent does make a difference to the overall flavour of the whiskey. And that was something that we didn't want. So to help with that, we add in a bit of water. It'll be literally be the tiniest bit. When it comes out of the casks, it's probably somewhere around 58, maybe 59%. We fill every single cask at 63.5%. This whiskey here is about 5-6 years old. So after about 5-6 years, you've lost a wee bit, but not very much. It probably sits, around about 58-59% when it comes out of casks. And then just a few drops of water.
We're assuming that's that strength in that bottle.
I wish. To be fair, what, like, straight out the taps on Isla, it's just whiskey. That's all that comes out of our taps. Maybe it is batch strength. Percent of red wine, it's 20%. So 70% bourbon, 20% red wine, 10% sherry. All the same age as well. So they're all, the casks are between 5-6 years old. No brown water comes out your calves. It does actually. For those who don't understand that, I know that sounds a bit disgusting, but because the ground on Isla is so peated, if you get your water from a rural or an independent water source, a lot of the times it is brown because the water will run through the peat banks, and then it makes it that like dark color. The water literally does look like whiskey. Doesn't taste like it, unfortunately, but it looks like whiskey. It's quite weird, especially if you've never seen that before. I think people think that it just must be something must just be because we make so much whiskey here, but It tastes just like normal water. So
Or it tastes peaty, but you're probably just immune to it by now.
yeah, maybe it does. I just won't notice. If it tastes peated, I would not be able to tell. I think it tastes nice, but that
It's,
maybe doesn't mean much.
your palate's just immune to peat at this point. Do you
I
make
think
an
it
unpeated
is.
whiskey, an unpeated version, or is everything you
We
make
have
peated?
actually done a couple of unpeated. Obviously, one being through the accidental burning of the kiln, we had to do some unpeated expressions for like fill some casks that were unpeated because we couldn't obviously smoke the barley. Our kiln was ashes. So we have some unpeated casks from then. That was
Well,
quite early
wouldn't
on.
that barley be unmalted, or if it comes?
It's we put it on the basically we had it on the floor still. There's literally like two or three batches. Obviously, this was back when we barely grew any barley at all, so it's like a couple of casks. And then we just dried it when it came off of the floor. So we didn't put it into the kiln at all.
You just put it in
Um,
like an electric dryer at home,
yeah,
like
yeah.
next to your
So it was
washer. You put it
dried.
in the dryer.
Yeah, basically. So it just wasn't smoked. So we have some unpeated casks from then. We also have some unpeated casks from a batch of barley that we got from a few years after that because we had basically a bottling that we done for this year for our festival. You know, the whiskey festival that happens on Isla. We done a bottling for our whiskey festival and it was unpeated, and that was one of our first kind of actual releases that were unpeated. We obviously have some casks from like the earlier days, but we've not released any of them yet. They've just sat in the warehouse. Unpeated obviously isn't something that we've focused on as much. We wanted all of our whiskies to be peated, but I definitely think now it's something that we're willing to try a lot more as we've kind of established ourselves in terms of flavour, in terms of distillery, in terms of what people know us for. I think we could definitely afford to do a couple of unpeated expressions, and I don't think people would maybe question it as much, um, which would be quite cool to see. That one that we had for Feish for the festival was delicious. It was lovely, and I think the good thing about Kilchoman is the fact that the peat doesn't necessarily carry our whiskies, as in without like our whiskey is still. I've got a lot of flavour going on about it through the long fermentation, through the size and shape of the stills. We create flavour there so that the peat is a part of it, but it's not the only thing that carries the whiskey to make it taste nice. So I think we are quite lucky in that sense. Whereas I think a lot of peated whiskey that's made on Islay, um, not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but I think a lot of the whiskey that's made on Islay that's peated, the peat is kind of the overall flavour. It's what carries the whiskey. And again, that's not a bad thing because that's what Islay whiskey a lot of the time is famous for, and that's what people love about it. But I think for us, we wanted something that could be good with and without. The peat was an asset, and it was something that we wanted because we were making Islay whiskies. But now we're kind of at a point where we do know that we could do unpeated, and it would probably work quite nicely. So nothing big released has been done to kind of to date, but that's not because we don't want to. It's just because we haven't felt the timing's been right, or we've had the stuff that's been ready, really enough of it to be ready. So next whiskey that you have is Loch Gorm, I believe.
You believe correctly.
Phew. So Loch Gorm is it is a core range expression, as in you will see it consistently. It is available widely, but unlike things like McHarrie or the batch strength, Loch Gorm is an annual release. So we do a new edition of Loch Gorm every single year, every annual release being slightly different. It comes out in April of every year. It was kind of an accidental annual release, to be quite honest. So we done the first one in 2014, and then it worked. Like it went, people loved it. People went nuts for it. So we done it again the next year and we gave it a name, and kind of that's how Loch Gorm was created. So what has always remained the consistent factor in it is the fact that it is always fully matured in Oloroso sherry casks. It is a full Oloroso sherry maturation, and it's sherry butts. So it's the really big, like 500-600 litre sherry casks. And that was, again, like what we wanted to create. We wanted kind of a full sherry matured whiskey. We felt like we could do that as well because our sherry casks are so like active. They do have a lot going on about them because obviously sourcing them directly from where we came from where they come from, really helped us to get like good quality active sherry casks. So I think that helps us in comparison to maybe what some other distilleries struggle with having enough or maybe consistent sherry casks. Obviously, we still don't get them that consistent. Like sherry casks are just one of these things that just do their own thing. You can't tell them what to do, but they are slightly more for us than maybe what a lot of distilleries struggle with. This is a very different style of Kilchoman, very, very different from McHarrie, from the batch strength, from maybe typical versions of the whiskey that we make. It wasn't what the flavour wise, what we were aiming to make with the distillery, but it works so well and people love it that we just keep doing it. And we've done other versions similar to it because of it. So other maybe more richer kinds of casks that we maybe didn't consider trying if we didn't know how well Loch Gorm worked. So we do a lot in fortified wines, so lots of sherries, lots of ports and Madeiras and things like that. And they are always some of our most popular whiskies. And I don't think we would have maybe have done them in the first place if this hadn't have been like the door that opened us up to that. Because like I said, Kilchoman was always made to be made in these lighter, more fresher style with a little bit of peat to kind of carry it along. Basically things like McHarrie, the batch strength, other whiskies like our 100% Isla, or even things like Sanic, if you've tried that. Whereas Loch Gorm is just us in a completely different version. What I always say about it is it's maybe the most, I don't, it's maybe a bad word to use, but maybe like the most typical Isla whiskey. I don't think you can really get a typical Isla whiskey nowadays, but when you think of Isla and you think of the flavour profile of Isla in general, as if you were trying to explain to someone who didn't understand the differences of the whiskey regions in Scotland, Loch Gorm leans more towards that typical Isla character, that richer, oilier, smokier taste. Because every single edition of Loch Gorm is different, again through no kind of fault of our own, because the cast just always come out tasting different and we're just trying to make a good flavour from it. It does mean that people generally do have kind of favourite versions of Loch Gorm because they all showcase a different style of maybe sherry cask in general, but also the style of the distillery. I think the hardest thing to achieve with Loch Gorm's balance, as in the mixture between the influence from the sherry casks, the influence from our spirit, and the influence from the peat. You want to kind of have that nice little balance between those three flavours, with one not overpowering the other. And obviously there is whiskies that are very famous for maybe pushing off that balance, as in you get things like Glenfarclas, for example. Glenfarclas make really heavy sherry whiskies. That's what they're known for. That's what they do well, and they are very sherried, and that's what they want. Or then you think of a distillery like Lafroig. Lafroig make very peaty whiskies. That's what they're known for. That's what they want. That's what leans towards their style of whiskey. Whereas for Kilchoman, when doing something like this, we wanted like a nice balance. We didn't want too much sherry. We didn't want too much peat, and we didn't want too much maybe of like the influence of our spirit. We wanted all three to kind of balance each other out, and that means that we're constantly changing the vatting of the cask. Not the fact that it's sherry, it's always sherry, but the fact if it's first fill or refills, the fact of the age of them, and that's just to try and make it taste the best in terms of balance, in terms of the outcome of that flavour. We don't want anything to overwhelm each other. Obviously, every version does taste slightly different. This version, in comparison to maybe last year's, I find this one's a lot more like fruity. And I think that is because we did use a higher proportion of Oloroso, like first fill Oloroso sherry casks in comparison to maybe last year's, which was more refill casks. So because of that, the higher proportion of refill casks, you're getting maybe a bit more influence from the spirit, meaning that it tastes a bit more peated when it marries with the casks. So you get a lot more of those maybe heavier, oilier notes from our spirit. Not that there's necessarily very much in them in our spirit at all, but maturing in something like a sherry butt, they're massive. So you are going to get them, whatever you have in them, you are going to get it by the time it's matured. Whereas in comparison to this year's edition, more first fill casks, meaning you're getting a lot more influence from the cask itself. So you maybe get a lot more like stone fruits, dried fruits, warm spices, and like a black pepper note to it. It's got that kind of like savory spice, and then it's like a sweet, like smoked barbecue, or like kind of barbecue meaty flavor, that kind of like sweet, smoky taste on the finish. And I think that's what people really enjoy about it. It's got a really lasting finish to it as well. So this one maybe lingers a bit longer than the first two that you had, or has a bit of like overall more of a weight to it or a heaviness to it. Which again, I think something that people really like about Islay whiskies in general is it's got that heaviness, that weight, that really warming feeling as it kind of goes down your throat, which is something that is obviously famous in Islay whiskies. Again, we didn't want it to be overwhelmingly peated or overwhelmingly, for lack of a better word, overwhelmingly Islay. But I think this is the one that does lean more towards, yeah, that general style of Islay whiskey in comparison to the lighter style of Islay that Kilchoman is was aiming to create or is known for. It is 46% once again, and it is 50 ppm. So same peating level as the McHarrie, as batch strength, but I think it definitely comes across a bit more peaty or a bit more heavy. And I think often, I think this is the other thing about like the peat flavor that you get with Islay whiskies, is that it's kind of, there's different levels to the peat flavor that you get with Islay whiskies. There's peaty, there's smoky, and then there's also like this heaviness, this oily, like this, the mouth feel that it gives the whiskey, and that's something that you don't really get with other peated whiskey elsewhere in Scotland. It doesn't have that weight, it doesn't have that heaviness, that oily, that like how it coats the inside of your mouth, and that lasting like texture is something that you get a lot with Islay whiskies that is from the peat, and I think this Loch Orm has that. Don't get the, yeah, you definitely don't get a brininess. I wouldn't say briny is never a word that I would use to describe Kilchoman. I wouldn't, that kind of TCP medicinal, which is maybe words you use, a lot of people use them to describe Islay whiskies. I don't think you get that with Kilchoman. I think you get I think you definitely get the heaviness. I think you definitely get the oiliness, or like the oily texture. But yeah, I don't think you get that slightly off note that you can get with a lot of Islay whiskey, which again, I don't mean that as like a negative, that kind of like slightly off flavor is something that is quite unusual if you don't drink Islay whiskies. But for people who know Islay and people that love Islay, I think it is something that is a reason they fall in love with it, is that just unique style. And so much of that is down to the peat. We cut all of our peat by hand that we're using for our own barley that we're obviously growing here ourselves and malting here ourselves. All that peat is cut ourselves by hand. Obviously up until really this year, the peat that we have used for the other whiskies was obviously Portela maltings, and they don't cut it by hand, but it was from Islay. Whereas now, sending our own peat to the mainland, all of our peat will be Islay peat cut by hand from the same peat bank, just about a mile from the distillery. So that'd be quite cool in the future to be able to see that change. Again, not that I think you'll notice the difference in the flavour, but just to kind of know that ourselves is quite a nice thought. That all of our peat is just done that really nice traditional way. I like to think that that does have an effect on the flavour, but I think that would be a lie. I think the fact that it's cut traditionally isn't going to make much of a difference in terms of flavour, but I think it's just, again, just knowing that yourselves as you drink it, it's just a nice factor. It just adds to the whole hands-on traditional aspect of the distillery that I think people really fell in love with. So, what do we think of Loch Gorm? Obviously, like I said, very, very different profile, flavour to the McHarrie, to the batch strength. And this is really what you're seeing is almost the two different sides of Kilchoman, the two different versions of the whiskies that we make. And this was one that was never really initially in the plan. Like I said, we always wanted to make something that was lighter, and then also the peat kind of layer to it in there as well. Whereas Loch Gorm really opened up a whole new avenue to whiskey that maybe wasn't the initial style that we wanted to get. And now you've got things you'll see all over the world. You've got expressions of Kilchoman that are done in these richer kinds of casks. We've used things like, just to give you some examples of cask types, things like rum, Madeira, Sauternes, red wine, port, cognac, Calvados, tequila, mezcal, champagne. Like there's so many different casks, and obviously within each category you don't just get like one kind. It's hundreds. We've used tawny port, we've used ruby port, we've used white port, we've used hundreds of different kinds of wine casks, we've used lots of different kinds of even sherries. We've used Oloroso being the most common, but we've also used PX sherry, we've used Fino sherry. You get things like Palo Cortado sherry, Muscatel sherry, like loads of different ones, and that's um, something that we're quite keen to experiment with because they are things that are less commonly used in the industry. Helps kind of maybe stick Kilchoman out on the market a bit better, because they are a bit more unusual. And we also use them, like I said at the start, we use a lot of these casks for full maturation. So the odd finish here and there for things like single casks, and we use a lot commonly, or a lot more commonly, done with finishing. But overall, like when it's a Madeira matured whiskey, it's not a Madeira finish, it's a Madeira matured whiskey. And same with port, it'll be port matured whiskey. And that allows us to get really rich flavours from these casks, and that's what we really wanted from them. And there's some of definitely my favourite whiskies from the distillery. I love the things that are done in Madeira or port or things like that. I always think they taste really, really nice. The Madeira matures. That is literally, I was just about to say that the Madeira cask matured is my favourite ever Kilchoman that I think we've released widely anyway. I've tried definitely a few single casks here and there that I dream about, but the Madeira cask was probably my favourite, like large quantity release that we've done. It is absolutely beautiful. If you get the chance to try it, please do. Or more importantly, get your hands on a bottle. Just get it. Just take my word for it. It's beautiful. So, anyone have any other questions about anything at this moment in time? Everyone happy?
We're sipping on whiskey. It's
Well,
not a
then,
bad
that was a silly question for me. Then, of course, you're happy.
thing.
I'll look for it. It is actually in the pot still in Glasgow. I've seen it there. Whether or not there's some of it left, I'm unsure. As long as I don't get there first and drink it all. But the last time I was there, they had it behind the bar. So ask nicely. Are we all ready for the next whiskey in that case?
The next one is Sauterne.
The turn. Yeah.
Right, let's do it.
So, obviously leaning a bit more in now to that, um, like yeah, maybe more experimental cask exploration side of the distillery. Well, as I mentioned, we use lots of different experimental casks at Kilchoman, and Sauterne is one of them. We've done a couple of Sauternes releases over the years, nothing too big. Sauternes is one of these things that's obviously quite hard to source for a start, so it's hard to get your hands on Sauterne casks. So something that maybe was never really that available to us, but something that we were quite keen to try. Using obviously all these fortified wines, they're very sweet. So things like sherry, port, Madeira, very sweet style of casks. So sweet cask or a fortified cask or something we knew would work, but Sauterne is obviously a dessert wine, so it is a sweet kind of cask, but in a different way. It's like kind of Sauterne, other things that are like sweet dessert. Oh, Marsala cask, we use them. That's another sweet dessert wine that we've tried. But Sauterne casks were expensive and hard to source and would be difficult to get consistency with. We've done one big release of Sauterne matured whiskey in the past, and it was actually a Sauterne finish. We done it in 2018, and it went down really, really well. Really, really well. We actually then used some of those casks to then, oh, you have the bottle. There she is. Well, the 2018 one. So we then use some of those casks. So we refilled those finishes essentially. And we also bought some fresh casks, some fresh Sauterne casks, and we've used them both. So this one is a combination of first fill and, well, yes, refill casks, but they were first filled for finishing, if that makes sense. So a combination of first fill, refill casks, and it was matured for 6 years. So, and then we released it obviously this year. It came out in May, so just 2 months ago, and it is 50 ppm, 50% alcohol, a limited release of just about 18,000 bottles, which sounds like a lot. When you're trying to ship that around the world, that doesn't leave you with very much for each market. I think the thing with it, don't expect an overly sweet whiskey. This definitely isn't maybe what you would typically think a Sauterne matured whiskey is going to taste like. If any of you have tried Sauternes, you can understand what I mean. Like Sauternes is very sweet. It's quite like syrupy. It's like honey. You get a little bit of that with the whiskey. There's no doubt about it. It definitely does have a sweet note to it, but maybe not as sweet as if you've tried other Sauterne matured whiskey in the past. Like I know Glenmorangie do quite a big Sauterne release, if any of you've tasted that, and it's very sweet. Lafroig have done some Sauterne matured whiskey. Bruichladdich love a Sauterne cask, but again, Lafroig and the Bruichladdich one are both peated, so, and finished as well. The Lafroig and the Bruichladdich one, as far as I know, are finished Sauterne matured whiskey. Whereas this here, fully matured, 6-year-old. I think it's got like a tropical fruit note to it as well. So you get like this fresh fruit flavor to it, but it's tropical fruit. It's like pineapple or mango or something like that. It's which I really like. And then it's got this maybe slightly spicy flavor to it. It's like a ginger like spice, and then it's got this the finish again that comes through that's slightly more like it's like a sweet smoke. So it's like that, it's that like barbecue sweet flavor to it. I think it's really nice. I think it's worked. But I do think it's one of these things that is slightly maybe more unusual. So we obviously, the aim of it was to kind of keep a nice balance and try not overwhelm Sauterne. We didn't want an overly whelming Sauterne whiskey, but I think that really has split whiskey drinkers. Like there's some people that drink this and go, oh, Sauterne matured, like, and expect heavy, sweet Sauterne matured whiskey. And then obviously because it's not that, they then don't like it as much. Or there's other people who absolutely love it because they don't want the sweet Sauterne style of whiskey and like this because of that. So I think it just depends on your preference on how you like your style of whiskey, or if you have tried Sauterne whiskies in the past, what you think of them, I think will really determine if you like this or if you don't. Um, but I think again the whole thing with Kilchoman, we're not necessarily making things for like I don't think the expectation is that every single person is going to like every single one of our whiskies. I think that would be unrealistic to expect. So I think it is quite nice to have these like conversations and have people like I'm not expecting every single one of you to sit here and love all of these whiskies that you're tasting. I think that's silly for me to assume that you're all gonna love every single one equally. Like I don't even love every single one of them equally. I think they're all nice whiskies. I think they all have their place. I think that we've made excellent quality, good whiskies for every single one of these expressions. But like I have favourites. Like yous will all have favourites. Um, so I think it's quite fair to assume that something even maybe slightly stranger like Sauterne isn't going to maybe be everyone's cup of tea, and that's completely fine. So very open to your opinions about it. And this is obviously the first time we've really done a full matured Sauterne whiskey on a wide scale. So quite interesting to see kind of what everyone thinks about it and how it's um what people are saying. As I say, so far it's been quite mixed. Not bad. I don't think anyone necessarily thinks it's bad, but I think it's just mixed in the sense of what you would expect it to be like. And then if it either doesn't meet or surpasses your expectations, then that's kind of where people are deciding. Is there something wrong with that? I'm surprised the whiskey didn't burn in the Irish Glencairn glass. I'm shocked actually. No, I'm joking. That's fine. You can drink it from whatever you like. I've seen people drink whiskey from some weird vessels in my lifetime. So an Irish Glencairn is definitely not the strangest thing I've witnessed. Yes, wellies. I was going to say that wellies is one thing that we do a lot in Scotland. And we'll not do a lot. That's maybe a bit of a stretch. But people, it's like I don't know why people do it. It's that things that people generally do it at like weddings and stuff like that, or like your 18th birthday or your 21st, or I don't know when you finish school or finish university or something. It's like a celebration, which sounds bizarre because you would not celebrate anything by drinking whiskey out of a welly, but people do that quite a lot. It's like they'll fill it with it'll be like yeah a wellies or just like little boots like brown boots, and you fill it with whiskey and you have to down it
What's a welly?
like a welly, like a welly boot, a boot,
That's a boot. Okay, got it.
a rain boot. Sorry,
That
I
sounds
forgot. Sorry,
unhygienic and
that's the first language barrier we've reached so far this evening. I'm quite proud of that.
Like a Cajun crock.
we were talking about whiskey, so we're all good there. And then you started talking fashion sense and you lost me.
Yeah. Sorry. I'll apologize. That's my fault. I said something the other day. I was at the distillery and I said something to someone the other day, and they were like, "What?" And I completely forgot that just certain things just don't translate. And even to like it was a group of Americans, and obviously you speak the same language. Like we talk the same language, but in a sense we absolutely don't. And I said minging, and they were like, "What?" And I was like, "Oh, it's minging." And they were like, "What are you saying?" And it means dirty. It means like unclean. And they just looked at me like I had two heads. And I was like, "Oh, interesting." So there you go. You've learned a new word for those who did not know. Minging means dirty. To be fair, I often find even like we're like I'm Scottish. I've lived in Scotland basically my whole life, and people will visit the distillery all the time that are English, and I can't understand a word that they're saying, or they can't understand a word that I'm saying. And they're our neighbours, so don't feel like I don't think I have a very strong Scottish accent though. To be fair, even though some people would tell me otherwise, but definitely in comparison to a lot of people in Scotland, I think there is much stronger accents than maybe what mine is. So, Sauternes, honest thoughts. I'm going to take that as good. Do we like it? Love. Okay, good.
I
Well,
love it, but
very
it's one of those
much.
whiskeys that you can't just drink. Like you have to explore and then like you have to think about it. So you can't just
I
enjoy it.
I completely agree. Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. Also, I've just seen your whiskey collection, and that is very impressive. Wow. It tastes Midian. I don't know if I know what that means.
It tastes dirty, like earthy.
Oh, Minion. Yeah.
Did I spell minion wrong?
Yeah, yeah. I'm thinking of like the little like I'm thinking of Despicable Me.
That's what
That's
I was
the image
thinking. That's what I thought you were
that's the
saying.
image I have in my head. I don't know what they taste like. I've never
Like
tried one.
bananas, obviously. But no, this tastes dirty. What's like earthy?
Yeah, yeah. As I said, I don't think it's not. It's definitely not. I don't know how to word it. It wouldn't. It's not Sauternes. It doesn't slap you in the face and go Sauternes. It's balanced. It's rounded. It's got the flavor from the Sauternes there, absolutely, but it's not the predominant, like overwhelming flavor that you might necessarily get from general Sauternes matured whiskey. And I think a lot of that comes down to, well, one, the age is only 6 years old, well, only, but as well the vatting, the fact that it is a lot of second fill cask. Mingin, see, that's how you spell it. That is how you spell it. Mingin apostrophe, Mingin.
That's the most gentle slap in the face that I could have ever imagined. Like Sauternes does this.
I know I always say that. It's probably one of my like when I'm talking about Islay whiskies. I think someone mentioned it to me once. They were like, "Oh, Isla's whiskies like um getting slapped in the face, but in a really good way." And I was like, "I love that. I love how you just explained that." And so I feel like it's now part of my explanation. I just think it's such a good way to like explain it.
I was just going to say, this is Guy. I really enjoying the Sauterne. What I like about it is the fact that you can try it and taste it and be very good in like having a tasting of Kilchomans and try to have somebody figure out what this is, what it's matured in. I think
Yeah.
that's why I enjoy it. It's a very, yeah, I wouldn't guess Sauterne. Not that I've had a lot of Sauterne, but I think it's very unique in that sense. I think it's very delightful. It's just that it's very tough to compare to for me because I just love the 57%. So I have to kind of dial my taste buds down for it. But
Mhm.
at the 50%, I think it's very delightful. So thank you
Mhm.
for producing such a wonderful dram.
Yeah, I definitely like a few of you've said that, and I definitely agree. Like, it isn't necessarily a whiskey that you would sit and just like just sit and like drink it and not really think about it. I think you have to sit and like almost like it's a conversational whiskey. It's something you would sit and drink with like friends, or like it's the kind of thing you would pull out and be like, "Oh, have you tried this?" Like, "Oh, you need to taste this." It's so unusual. It's so different. I think that's the kind of thing about it that I really like, because it is, um, yeah, like maybe more. You've got to kind of think about it a bit more when you're drinking, when you're tasting it, which I quite like. But yeah, I see. I think the strength of it. We actually did do. Um, it wasn't necessarily well, it was a cask strength version. It was like a cask sample of it. We done I don't know if any of you know, but we done a tour around Europe. So a few months ago now, and we done this tour around Europe, and we took samples with us of upcoming releases, and one of them was obviously at the time this Sauternes. So we had these samples, um, from the casks, and it was cask strength. It was a couple of casks from the vatting that we married together that we knew were going to be in the whiskey, and we didn't dilute it down, and it was 58.3% or something like that. And everyone went nuts for it. They absolutely loved it. And then obviously halfway through the tour, we released the actual Sauternes. So it came out in May. and we were about 5-6 weeks into the tour at this point. And then of course people could have both. People could see like this version and that version, and the amount of people that were like, why did you dilute it down? They were like, why did you not keep it at the... But I think that was just because they had like the direct like comparison. I think like as a whiskey it's lovely, and I think that if you don't know about the other version, you hadn't tasted it, you wouldn't think anything of it. You wouldn't go, oh, this needs cask strength. But I think for those who had tasted it with and without having been diluted, everyone was like, so nice cask strength. But I think that just goes back to the whole thing about just people love cask strength Kilchoman. Like it's just, we could not make enough cask strength whiskey if we tried. People just want more and more of it.
You get at the end, maybe it was the power of suggestion, but I do get that hint of mango, and I just had a very nice mango last week, so I can imagine on the 58.3%, the mango was just coming out like crazy.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's what people were in love with.
Yeah, I think the thing about like cask strength in general, like I'm not just saying this necessarily about Kilchoman, but in the whiskey as a whole, like people maybe don't necessarily understand cask strength, or maybe a bit scared of cask strength whiskey because the number seems quite high. But a well-made whiskey at any ABV shouldn't burn. All it'll do is just elevate the flavor. The burn comes from essentially like bad quality made spirit. Like if you drink rubbish cheap vodka or cheap rubbish tequila, and it will burn at 30% because it's been ran through stills with zero thought, zero like effort. It's not slowly distilled. It's no thought has gone into it. So of course it's going to burn. Of course it's going to have that harsh flavor to it because none of that harshness is removed. The harshness comes from flavors or elements that are created during distillation that are then not removed. Whereas with whiskey, our whole aim is to kind of mellow that out and slow distillations and really harness all the elements. And so much is thought about throughout each stage of the process, especially for someone like Kilchoman, because we're making young whiskies and we have to focus on these early stages as much as possible. That high ABV, all that means is just an elevation of what you've already got. It just brings everything out of its shell even more. I think even for a lot of people who are like first time whiskey drinkers, I'd maybe more so recommend them cask strength whiskey, because even though that first hit, that first kind of taste that you get, you might get a bit of the alcohol, but afterwards, once your palate like adjusts, once you give your mouth and your taste buds a chance to like open up to the alcohol and adjust, all you get after that is just flavor. And for someone who maybe isn't as tuned in to picking up on flavors with whiskey, especially peated whiskey, because the peat is such a predominant note, it's hard to kind of get past that. Cask strength just really, really helps you to pick up on individual notes. Like if I'm telling you, you get like mango or fresh fruit or barbecue or something, and you're just sitting there and you're like, what? Like that makes no sense. I think cask strength is one of these things that really helps to bring that out 100%. Like I think it's such a good way to drink Islay whiskey specifically, because it's a really good thing to help kind of get you to understand the difference in the flavors that if you kind of just can't get past the peat. Like obviously the majority of like my whiskey drinking career, if you could call it that, I've drank peated whiskey. Like I've worked only for Kilchoman. I've not worked for another Islay distillery. When I started drinking whiskey, like I didn't drink whiskey previous to working for the distillery, and I've now worked for them for over 6 years. So obviously my journey has started with them. I've drank majority peated whiskey, and since doing this job specifically, so since doing all the brand ambassador stuff, I've obviously met a lot of other brand ambassadors from different distilleries outside of Islay, and they've given me a lot of whiskies that are unpeated. What a shame, such a shame, just tough life. But the amount of stuff that I've tried, and I found it so strange because I've kind of went backwards, as in like I now don't have the peat, like that flavor is almost, not that it's missing, but I now find it really, really strange drinking like these other whiskies that I've now kind of got into so much more. Like I now love a lot more unpeated whiskies than I necessarily did before, because I hadn't really tried much. But I find it so strange because now all I taste from them is just so much flavor. because the peat, like the note of the peat isn't there. Like you'll probably notice it yourself. So if you drink loads of peated whiskey and then you suddenly go back to like an unpeated and you'll be like, whoa, like that really is fruity, or that really is sweet, or that really is floral, or like whatever kind of flavor like you're trying to get from it. Like it just, you really taste it. And I think I found that so strange because I was so used to peat and then like other flavors. Like I think something I'm probably quite bad for doing is talking about Kilchoman and saying it's like I'll be like, oh, you'll get it's light and it's fresh and it's sweet and it's floral and you'll get this and this and this. And then I kind of have to go, and it's peaty. Because when you're talking about Islay whiskey, you kind of just brush over that. It's just a known fact. It just is peaty. So without that, it's kind of unusual to kind of go backwards, if that makes sense. But I found it quite interesting to like see that difference and see how the other distilleries have to do things without having kind of that peat note to like almost like keep you like a wee comfort blanket. You've got that little peaty protection. So
Sauterne it's different from any other Sauterne that I have. It's not sweet almost at all. It's usually Sauterne is very sweet finish. It's much more on the sour note.
Yeah,
than sweetness. I love it.
No, I absolutely agree. I definitely think so. As I said, like sweet wasn't really, I don't think sweet was the goal with it. I think we wanted like we wanted Sautern's influence, but we definitely didn't want a sweet Sautern's matured whiskey, which, as I said earlier on, I think definitely will divide opinions, because if you expect that flavour, if you want that flavour, you might prefer if we did do that. But for us personally, that just wasn't what our aim if it was.
Right.
So, are we all ready for the last whiskey? The last one that you have is actually, maybe I shouldn't be biased, but it's one of my personal favourites. I love this whiskey. For those who said that they liked the Madeira and someone mentioned something about port cask as well, if you like those kinds of whiskies from Kilchoman the way that I do, then I think you'll probably like this one as well. It is a PX sherry cask, so Pedro Ximénez sherry. Pedro Ximénez sherry is kind of the sweetest of the sherries. So if you know much about the sherry industry, my very basic understanding of sherry, I know obviously you get lots of different kinds. Oloroso is kind of the most common. That's or commonly used in the whiskey industry. And maybe on the slightly like sweeter side of sherries, you also get quite dry sherries, so things like Fino. And then PX sherry is really one of the sweetest kinds of sherries that you can get. And that's what this whiskey has been matured in. It's a full maturation in Pedro Ximénez sherry, 5 years old. We have used PX sherry in the past. We done a release back in 2021, I believe it was. And it was a full maturation. And that was the first time we ever used PX sherry casks, fully like worldwide release. And we matured it for 4 years. All first fill casks. So we like bought the casks, fully matured them, 4 years old. It worked really well. People loved it, but it was very sweet. Once again, being all first fill, fully matured. Sorry, this one here is a marriage of full maturations and finishes, and that's really just to keep the balance. We felt like the first version we done off it was a bit too sweet, so we wanted to kind of rein this one back in a bit. I do think it is still very sweet, but I think that's what I like about it. I like that mix between the sweetness of the PX and the savoury taste of the peat. I think that works really well. I think Kilchoman does that really well. I don't think it's it's probably the most furthest from maybe a typical Kilchoman. I don't think I would drink this. Like, I don't think if you gave me this blind, I would drink that and go, that's Kilchoman. I think I obviously know it is now because I drank it so much. I love it. But I think without that, if you just handed me this whiskey, I'd never tasted it before, I wouldn't necessarily go, yep, Kilchoman. It maybe wouldn't be my first instinct, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's still a lovely whiskey. It's 50 ppm, so all these whiskies are the exact same peating level, but you can really see the difference in how the casks bring out the flavors and display the peat in different ways. And that's what I was saying, like Isla peat in general just has so many different, it wears so many different masks. You can do so much with Isla peat and maybe comparison to peat that you can get elsewhere in Scotland, and that's because it's got so much going on about it, and it lends itself so nicely depending on like distillery to distillery how we want to like activate that. And there is some distilleries that use it to its absolute full potential, as in as peaty as you can make Isla peat, they will do that. But then there is also some distilleries that want a bit more of that balance, like Kilchoman. But even within a range of whiskies like this, you can really see the different elements that peat can play a part in it, and how it interacts with all the casks just so differently. I think is really important. And in something like this, it is that, like, it's like an earthier peat, maybe definitely quite rich. Again, slightly sweet note to it, but the sweetness definitely comes from the PX and how that has an influence in it. It's like an orange zest, raisins, like almost Christmas cake flavor. You've got slight like sweet like cinnamon, nutmeg spice, that kind of warm nuttiness, and then like a dark chocolate, like sweet finish to it. Yeah, a very nice whiskey. It's got that really like lingering peated aftertaste as well. Something for us that, like I said, we've used PX sherry in the past. I think we'll continue to use them in the future. I think just because it isn't necessarily a typical or like a something you would maybe associate with Kilchoman in general, I don't think that's necessarily like a bad thing for us. Like, we're not too bothered about the fact that it's not us to a T, because I think the whole thing with Kilchoman is just the experimentation and the fact that if we only made one style of whiskey, I think we'd really be limiting our market, we'd be limiting our fan base. And we just want as many people as possible to enjoy and find out and discover Kilchoman. So doing things like this is, like I said, kind of really fits into that category of us in a different form. So this is more similar to things like the kind of like Loch Gorm sort of sits in the same family as stuff like that, and even things like the port casks we've used, or Madeira casks, or things like that. I think they're all kind of like one sort of style of Kilchoman, and then there's almost like the lighter, fresher style of Kilchoman, things like the bourbon barrels, or the lighter wine cask that we've used, or things like Calvados, or even like cognac, these kind of like lighter, fresher casks. Fino sherry to an extent as well. The ones that we've used of them are very kind of like dry and fresh. And then not only that, those kind of two separate styles of the distillery, there also is the 100% Isla style of the distillery, which does taste different. Like anything that we make with our own barley has a completely different flavour profile to it, to these ones that you've tried here that are all made, well, these ones here all would be made when we got barley from the Maltons and Portellan. And that is, yeah, those two things within themselves are like two entirely different DNAs of the distillery. So many different bodies.
Where are the bodies buried? This is delicious. Now I'm getting the fire, like the campfire. Now finally getting it. One of the traditions we have here is we like to take a group photo, and I see everyone's got their camera on. So hopefully you still have a little bit in your glass. Raise at least one glass. I see you, Jeff. Multiple glasses there. There we go. At least one glass. You don't have one, Emma?
I need to get mine. It's over here. A second.
Yeah, grab a glass. I hear Kilchoman's pretty good. Grab that.
Put it.
No worries. In the meantime, since everyone's already tasted everything, I'm gonna also throw out the poll and see how that turns out today. That should be fun. Any guesses on what Emma's gonna port for herself tasting? She probably poured herself something really interesting. It's a good guess. Oh, interesting. Okay. All right. Let's see. Anyone else guessing? Guess it in the chat. Jeff, guess what Emma poured for herself? She has access to every single Kilchoman ever made.
I couldn't find the glass that I poured for myself earlier on. God knows where I sat that. I was obviously half asleep, so I got a different one.
Okay. So the whiskey elves came and stole your glass of whiskey. That makes a lot of sense.
I know. I've set it somewhere in my 3 a.m. whiskey pouring mind, but God knows where. I've probably like put it in the freezer or something because I thought that would have been a good idea.
Maybe. All right. Let's everyone raise a glass and smile to the camera. I'm going to try this new app in the Zoom. So we're going to try this. Cheers. That work? Wait, hold on. Let me see.
I think so.
Oh, take a freaking picture of me. Crap that. Wait, what? What is it doing? Oh, interesting.
It did a
Ooh,
pop-up
interesting.
asking if we wanted you to do the picture.
All right, I'm gonna do it one more time.
It makes everybody accept that you're going to take a picture now.
All right, let's do one more time the good old fashioned way. Smile. Got it. The good old fashioned way is just do a screenshot, and that works perfectly.
Safe.
I was trying to use all this new technology and be fancy. All right, so now people have guessed in the chat of what they think you poured for yourself. You want to tell us what you poured for yourself?
This one here is actually a single cask.
Oh.
Because I'm a lucky person that gets access to single casks.
Good way to say it.
So it is a single cask, and it is actually a Calvados finish. This was a previous distillery exclusive, so we only sold it in the shop. For those who ever are lucky enough to make their way over to Isla, I know you're obviously a bit far away, but we sell loads of different shop exclusives, so things that are, and they always change, but they're always single casks. The one in the shop right now, not to make any of you jealous, but it's a 16-year-old sherry butt. So one of our oldest ever whiskies. But I love this Calvados finish. It was one of my favourite ones that we've done in the distillery. So like I was saying, we very rarely do finishing. It's more full maturations, but we have had a couple, and that's one of them. So very nice.
It looks like Jeff has one.
That 16-year-old sherry butt single cask is freaking amazing.
You have it?
Yeah, well, we just came back like 2 weeks ago. We were there at the distillery, so
nice.
We missed you.
For the rest of you who Jeff made jealous, for you to know, we just cleared the 15-year-old single cask, fully matured in the sherry cask for the Impacts Cask Evolution Kilchoman. So it's going to be hitting the shelves in about 2-3 weeks. And that's been matured in the Oloroso sherry butts for 12 years and then finished in Oloroso sherry hogshead for 3 years. So I hope everyone is not as jealous as Jeff was trying to make you.
Sam, is that the big brother to the 14-year-old?
No, this 14-year-old Jeff was the fully matured in bourbon casks. That was a great one. Cask number 18.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. And speaking of Saturn, we're going to have this single cask coming into the United States as well. And this is, I think it's hitting the port at the same time as the 15-year-old sherry. So this is finished in Saturn casks for about 27 months. So it's not overpowering the kind of a DNA of the Kilchoman being kind of citrusy.
Send some to Indianapolis.
We have some for
all your whiskey collections. I'm just seeing as the pictures come up, and you've got some of you have some massive collections of whiskey. So very impressive.
Well, I think Jeff beat me on this. There's a few people in the United States that beat me on this, I'm pretty sure. But my collection is more like Anthony signed the bottle, or
Yeah.
the distillery manager, who is no longer unfortunately with us, signed the bottle, or something that you mentioned as limited releases. Then they started like with this is I believe it's spring or something in the old bottle.
Yep, spring
So,
2011. Yep.
yeah. And then you were talking about batch strength, and you know better than I do that if it was up to Anthony, he would just release only bourbon matured whiskeys.
Yeah.
So, we've been begging him, let's do McHarrie by cask strength. Let's do McHarrie by cask strength. And he did it for a couple of occasions, like US tour, Kilchoman US tour.
Yes.
And then you
Yes.
guys released this one.
Yes. I remember because the sheep with the little Christmas hats. Yep.
Yes. Yeah, we had
Actually,
that.
this one's got 99 points, which was highest in industry for this.
Yeah.
This is distilled spirits from
Mhm.
international whiskey competition. So that all prompt to get this baby release.
Mhm.
So this is an ongoing release, which is going to join, or already joined, regular McHarrie Bay and Sunny,
Mhm.
and we're so proud of it. It's just everything that Kilchoman can show. It's in this. That's
Yeah.
basically the one. When I add water, I think the pit level goes up for me personally. But
No,
it's
I
just
do
a
agree.
beautiful.
I do agree. I think like batch strength was obviously a long time coming, and like you're completely right. Like, these McHarrie Bay cask strengths are probably some of our most popular whiskies, as in the people that know about them. Absolutely, like I don't think I've met a person that has ever said that they did not like the McHarrie Bay cask strength. It is, and that one, like you say about getting 99 points, which is like incredible, one of the highest rated whiskies like in the international whiskey spirits competition. So we were just so proud of that to have happened, and it just goes to show it shows more to the effort in our process. It shows that how much time, how much thought, how much like work has been put into it, and it paid off. And to now be doing something like batch strength, we're very happy with it. We're hoping it's going to kind of work. We're hoping it's going to continue to sell. People so far seem to love it. We might do a few tweaks and changes here and there, just depending on really stock levels, as in how much of it we sell. We don't know if we have the cask to maintain it at that same sales, if that makes sense. So we might have to limit it slightly for a wee while just to catch up with ourselves, but that all depends on how well it sells. It's only been out for a few months really, and it's only reached faraway markets in these just last few weeks. So we're only really getting the full picture of how well it's going to go now really. But to do something like that, to have a new core range expression, we haven't released a new core range whiskey really since we released Sanig, and that was in 2016. We plan to have a lot more core range whiskies by now, but we couldn't because of stock levels, because the whiskey was gaining so much popularity and we did not have the stock to keep up with it, which is a very good problem to have, but still a problem. And now that we're kind of at the point where we can do something like this, we're just really excited to see what the future holds, really, to be honest.
Can you talk about Sanig? That's the one like core expression that we're not tasting, and I see it in every store.
So Sanig is basically the more sherry version of McHarrie. We released McHarrie, it came out in 2012, and it was going really well. We did want a different style of whiskey for the distillery, so we weren't just making these bourbon matured whiskies that we became quite known for. And we'd obviously started buying sherry casks. We'd done a couple of like single casks here and there. We obviously done Loch Gorm accidentally. And then in 2016, we were trying to create a vatting to make another unlimited expression, without making it too much hassle for ourselves to make something that was completely different in like how we made it, basically. But we wanted a completely different style of whiskey, as in a completely different flavour. So McHarrie and Sanig are actually identical. They have no difference about them whatsoever, other than one tiny little thing that we change, and that is the vatting, so the marriage of the casks. Like I said at the start, if you can remember, McHarrie is predominantly bourbon, 90% bourbon, 10% sherry. Sanig is basically the opposite. It is 70% sherry, 30% bourbon. That is the only difference. But because of that, it tastes completely different. It looks completely different. Everyone always thinks that Sanig's older or McHarrie is a higher ABV or one is more peaty than the other. Like everyone has their, like people, what people think is completely different about them, but basically they are identical whiskies other than changing the vatting around. We always wanted McHarrie to kind of be like the standard whiskey and Sanig just to be kind of, it's slightly more like, I don't want to say premium, but it's slightly more like less available whiskey. So yes, they would both be unlimited, but we always wanted more McHarrie, as in every single place that stocked Kilchoman, we wanted them to stock McHarrie. And then from there, the next whiskey, if they got in a second one, would be Sanig. But now we notice people asking for Sanig and not McHarrie, and we have people crying out for Sanig, and it's slowly becoming more of people's favourites over the last couple of years, really. But I think a lot of that's down to a lot more new people drinking whiskey. So sherry is becoming a lot more popular in terms of what customers want in comparison to bourbon, because it's sweeter. So people prefer it a lot more, I think, with Islay whiskey maybe as well, because it helps to balance out and kind of almost like put a little blanket over the peat. It kind of hugs the peat. It balances the peat. Whereas something like McHarrie with the bourbon barrels really displays the peat. It's like, this is the peated flavour. Here is also some bourbon notes, but like this is peat. Whereas I think Sanig kind of integrates the peat, I think is the best way to word it. So for a lot of people who maybe aren't as big into peated whiskey, they're trying to get into Islay whiskies or whiskey in general, Sanig, people love it. The amount of people that have told me that Sanig is the reason that they started drinking Islay whiskey or peated whiskey, or people have even told me it's the first whiskey that they tried and they just fell in love with whiskey from there, which is lovely to hear, but was never really in the plan for it to be as maybe popular as what it has become. But yeah, people absolutely love it. We'll definitely continue to make it. Do not panic. Sanig will not disappear. We even put the price up thinking that would stop people. It hasn't stopped a soul.
Just to add to this, and probably Emma, you will not be able to reveal the secret, but I can take a liberty of doing that. We're going to be bringing Sanig cask strength, and I know a lot of people in this group are big cask strength or batch strength lovers, so it's going to be a limited release, which is going to be launched in Q1 of 2025 in US. So great news. Again, took us a few years to convince Anthony to do that, and
yeah, we've all
one
been
more thing
shouting
that
at, don't worry.
Yeah. When I was at the distillery last time, I learned one thing that I didn't know about Sanig. So 70% ex-bourbon, and as I understand, you still use the hogsheads for Sanig.
Yes.
And 30% bourbon, but then when you do the vetting, you don't bottle it right away. You put it in the sherry casks back for about 6 months and then bottle it. So that was interesting to learn.
Yeah, so it's quite a weird marriage. I think obviously the easiest way to explain it is just saying like 70% sherry, 30% bourbon, but using the hogsheads helps massively, because so Sanig, just to give you an idea, like in comparison to Lochgorm, because I know a lot of you quite like Lochgorm, completely different whiskey. Even though Sanig is 70% sherry and Lochgorm's fully matured in sherry, you would think they're going to be pretty similar. But see, because they're using the hogsheads for Sanig in comparison to using the butts for Lochgorm, because the surface area, like Sanig imparts so much flavour in a short period, and it really pushes the sherry. So it's fruity, it's vibrant, it's a bit sweeter. It's quite it's got this lovely like syrupy texture to it. Whereas Lochgorm is thick and it's heavy and it's almost savoury, and you get more of those, like, as I say, it's like a sweet bitter taste. It's like dark chocolate or like dried like sour fruit, and then that barbecue meaty oily texture to it as well. So completely different whiskies despite being both sherry versions. Also Sanig's about 5 years old, Lochgorm's 10 years old, but if you look at the two of them side by side, Sanig is often much darker than Lochgorm, and that's because all of our whiskies natural in colour, and obviously by using the smaller casks you're getting a lot of colour imparted, like because you're getting more wood contact basically. So even though Loch Gorm is twice its age, because the casks are so much bigger, you're just not getting enough wood contact to give it that. It's got Sanic has such a rich dark color, which I think is another reason that attracts people towards it, because people will look at it and go, oh, that's dark, I like that. Because people are just, I mean, we all do it. You'll look at a whiskey and you'll want the one that's kind of the darkest, or the, because you'll think it'd be the richest or the biggest in flavour, which isn't always the case, as you'll probably all know. But I think at one point we all have been quite bad for probably doing that. I know I definitely have. And you'll just kind of make an assumption of how it looks. So I think, yeah, Sanic works.
Are you curious to know what the favorite expression of the night was?
I am actually very.
All right, so we've all voted. I think everyone voted except you.
Do you want? I can vote. Would you like me
Please
to
do.
vote?
Yes, go ahead. I like having 100% participation. Oh my God, the watch glass that I used to cover the samples now smells like smoke. It's crazy.
Right, there we go.
There we go. All right, now you get to guess what you think the group's favorite was.
I think it's
But,
hard.
and now I know what you voted for too, because you're the holdout.
Sugar. I think based upon like just what you were kind of all saying and like comments and stuff like that, I think Loch Gorm.
Okay, you gonna lock that in? That's your final answer?
I don't know. I'm worried now, but I think so. Am I
All right.
wrong? I'm wrong, haven't I?
I'm gonna end the poll. Drum roll, please. Lochcombe got 0 votes. It was nearly a three-way tie, but you pushed the PX Sherry a little further.
Oh, sorry, folks.
No worries. It still would have won by 1, but now 1 by 2.
Oh my God. Oh, I'm obviously glad you say that because it's my favourite, but I am actually quite surprised.
Yeah.
Oh, good. To be fair, those top 3. I'm not like those being top 3. They're good top 3. I'd absolutely agree with those as top 3. I just know how popular Loch Gorm is, so I just kind of think
Well,
Loch Gorm.
it's always a tough one because I force people to pick their one favorite of the night. So and they've had a few drinks and they're always angry at me afterwards. It's okay. I'm used to it. I would have voted for the batch strength personally. I don't get to vote, but
okay, we'll take that into consideration.
yeah, thank you.
Your vote will be counted in my mind.
All right, please report back to the distillery and let them know.
I will. I'll let them know.
This was such an exploration of flavor and distillery personality. Clearly, there's the distillery character running through every one of these expressions, but as other people have said, each expression is so unique and interesting in its own right that I can see why people have extensive collections of Kilchoman.
I think the thing about Kilchoman, you could just like there isn't just one style to it. There isn't one, like I said, like we wear so many hats. Like there isn't just kind of one way of drinking it. And I think that's what I was saying, even when I'm explaining them, because I think the easiest way to explain them, like I'm saying about the PX, and I'm saying, well, it's maybe not as typically us or Loch Gorm, and I'm saying it's more of like a typical style of Islay whiskey. And I think it's just because for us, we just do it in so many different versions. And like you're right, I think that's the reason why people could just collect it endlessly, is because we do so many different things. You'll never really, you could just keep on going and going, and everything's just different. Everything we do is just so different. I think it's the other reason why we don't really want to limit ourselves to doing loads of unlimited releases, because then it takes away from the exploration side of the distillery and the uniqueness of the distillery, in that everything is just so different. Even I know some of you's had like this Sauternes in comparison to the last Sauternes, and maybe some of you have this PX in comparison to the last PX, or the last PX and you're trying this one, or previous editions of Loch Gorm and all that kind of stuff. Like I think that is really cool to even be able to compare those, because yes, essentially in essence they're the same whiskey, but they're not at all. They're so different, and a lot of that's down to just evolution of the distillery, just like all this sort of stuff. Changes we've made, just tweaks that we feel have improved it, but like who's to necessarily say that we're like, just because we are doing it, I'm not saying that we're right. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, everyone's opinion of whiskey is so different and everyone's so personal. And like I mentioned earlier on, we're not expecting every single person to love every single common expression, but we're hoping that we're doing enough that there is kind of something out there for everyone. That's what we've always wanted. We want everyone to enjoy Kilchoman as much as possible.
Speaking of variety of flavor and doing different things, can you talk a bit about your sister brand that makes the soy sauce?
I only recently figured this out. One of like I can't remember if it was James, like James Wells, or whether it was his brother Peter, but no, I don't. It wasn't either of them. It was George, like the third brother. And I said to James and Peter about it because I was like, "This is so funny. I wonder if they've noticed." And someone had mentioned it to George once at tasting down in England, as in he was doing a tasting in a shop, and like in this, it's in a shop called Selfridges. If any of you know that, like in London, it's like a very fancy high-end store. They sell thousands of stuff, everything from, I don't know, like Dior bags to like Michelin star like chef food. Like it sells everything, all high end, very very high end. And he was doing it in there, and someone walked up to the stand. Obviously, with this shop not just selling whiskey, they were confused, and they said like, they were like, "What, like the soy sauce?" And he was like, "What?" And he didn't understand. He was like, "No, it's whiskey," and he kind of clicked afterwards, and he told me about it, and I was like, "Oh my god, that's hilarious." And I said to Peter about it because Peter does like all of our Asian market, and I was like, "Has anyone in Asia ever said to you about the fact that Kilchoman sounds like Kikuman?" And he was like, "I have never heard that before." I was like,
Really?
"Well, like I had never, no one has ever said it to me. No one has ever said it to me until George said it to me like a few months ago." And I was like, "That's so odd." Yeah, I said we should have done it for April Fools. We should have said we were releasing like a collab or something.
That's what I'm thinking. Or you should do a collab.
Whiskey matured soy sauce or soy sauce made
Like
whiskey.
seeds in a barrel and some
I don't
soy
know which
sauce.
crossover we want.
Yeah. The umami flavors would probably work pretty well.
Yeah, I was gonna say that it was not an unfamiliar tasting note for people to pick up on whiskey. So
It's actually a hack that
who knows?
I've
Maybe
learned
we'll start something.
Yeah, on YouTube channel, one of the bartenders that I follow suggested that you add a few drops of like saline solution to a cocktail to bring out the flavors. He was saying that because of whiskey being barrel aged and all that stuff, and soy sauce being aged, that a few drops of soy sauce instead of salt actually works really well in a whiskey cocktail. So just
Yeah, I can see that.
try that in like a drop or two of soy sauce in the next cocktail and see if that works. And that could be something fun. I don't know if the names are similar enough to where if somebody doesn't know how to pronounce Kilchoman, I could see them confusing it. You guys should totally play into it.
Yeah,
Just as a
I
fun
think
marketing
so.
thing.
I think it'd be funny. We'll see. If you see anything coming up in the near future, know it was because of this conversation.
Sam has my address, so if you do release a soy sauce aged,
We'll send you a bottle. We'll
sounds
send
good.
you a
That's
bottle.
fair. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That was absolutely fantastic. Sam, thank you as always for setting this up.
Yeah,
It was
thank
absolutely
you.
great.
Thank you so much.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you
You know,
for having me.
I enjoy your group. Emmy, you did a great job. So tomorrow I have a meeting with Anthony and James. So you owe me $10 to say that to them. So it's cash or check. No, really, it was a great. I know it's easy to talk Kilchoman, and as I said, this group is very kind of a high level. They know their whiskeys, and I kind of like this almost equal spread between the three. And I knew they're gonna go for high end stuff. So spoiled guys, thanks to you, Vadim. But yeah, they do have the taste, and they do know their whiskey. Jason doesn't like peated whiskeys, but he was pushing himself through that, and other people. Jeff, by the way, make sure that you talk to Dennis Lynch. Right? Yeah. Thank you all very much. Always a
Yes,
joy.
thank you.
And
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
Sam's
Appreciate that.
meeting is at
Yeah,
7
thanks,
a.m., so
Sam.
we'll make
I'll
sure
be
to
in
call
touch
you.
with Dennis this next weekend. So
beautiful.
Awesome. Emma, thank you so much. If they ever let you
Alright.
come visit us in California,
I
definitely
know, I would
please
love
reach out.
to. I would absolutely love to.
I'll-
Convince
I'll-
James.
I'm not gonna speak for everyone, but my bar is definitely open for when you come to visit. And I'm sure
Thank
everyone
you.
else will be happy to welcome you as well.
Thank you very much. I've sat here, it's so strange actually, because obviously it was dark when I started and now it's like light outside. I mean, it's 5 o'clock in the morning and I can, I'm on Isla just now, I'm staying at my parents' house and I can see the distillery from my parents' house. So
Oh, wow.
see the everything just warming up. They're
You get that
getting
sunrise
started.
view of the distillery. That's gorgeous.
Yeah, I do.
The farmer already in the field.
Yes, yeah. Actually, the farmer's my dad, and he's still upstairs in bed. So, no, he's not. No, he's not in the
Shots
field.
fired.
But
Awesome.
yes, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. This was very fun.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emma.